Hello and welcome to week 13 of Busy 1071 online, and welcome face-to-face students if you're watching this. This is not a live recording. This is a studio podcast. Some are live, some are studio, as you've noticed throughout the semester. This one will be a little bit shorter after the amount of content you got the last couple weeks. I'm not trying to give you guys a break. It's just the way the content is set up. So this podcast content lecture will be covering in week 13 the beauty and art of the comparative market analysis and how important this actually is to provide your clients, your buyers, whomever it may be, yourself, if you're looking to be an investor, some sort of valuation on the property that you are looking to buy, the property that you're looking to sell, on the property that you own, and you're trying to get investors to maybe loan you some money, stuff like that. So there's a lot of reasons this happens. I want to say right off the top, I want to clarify, this is not a set of slides that by any means would teach you how to be an appraiser. Okay, so in the profession of real estate, you can be in sales, you can be in appraisals, you can be a home inspector. There's lots of different things you can be, as we have talked about earlier in the class. There is a completely separate course for becoming a licensed appraiser. So as a realtor, as a licensed salesperson, you would never call what you are doing an appraisal because you are not a licensed appraiser. You would call it a comparative market analysis. And you can still do a pretty darn good job with the amount of information you're provided, even without being a licensed appraiser. And that was shown in previous weeks where I showed you how you could look up historical listings and look what they've sold for. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time in this video showing you all that stuff because it would just take too much time. This is just explaining to you what this is and how it works and how you would do it. And if you were to decide to become a licensed realtor, all of that information would be at your fingertips, but you would not be conducting appraisals. I call them opinions of value, is what I call them as a licensed person. So an opinion of value. And I will talk about that opinion of value situation just on the next slide here. But this is what we're going to cover here in today's podcast. The different types of valuations that you would include in a CMA. How market economics affect that. That just kind of happened by default, that it's the economics of the market that create the valuation if you're doing the comparable type of valuation. So there's two different types. So market economics, we're also going to get into those in terms of statistics and data and showing you how the real estate market kind of moves. And then the power of the proper comparative market analysis and how important this is with your client. That'll just be an ongoing theme throughout the podcast. And then there'll be a short supplemental video that has some of the instructions. It covers kind of what I'm expecting for your 5% assignment for this material, and that will be in a second video. So this will just cover the actual notes. We'll get into some real estate investment stats, and we're also going to talk about some comparisons between the stock market and real estate because people get really worked up about how dangerous it could be to invest a ton of money in real estate when they hear all these horror stories about Michigan and Florida and the west coast of the USA and what happened there, how the market just fell out from under itself. So I'm going to show you the reality of how real estate markets move when compared to stock markets, because a lot of the valuation types we use in real estate are very similar to stocks, but it takes a lot longer for these things to move like stocks. And I'm going to show you a specific stock that moves a ton, and you're going to understand why real estate is a lot more stable. Okay, I'm not saying it's safer. It depends on how long you plan to own it. It's just a lot more stable. So as we go through this, you're going to be picking up a fair amount of knowledge and enough to be able to equip yourself when you become a realtor to establish a value for a client's property, to establish a value for some real estate. And you need to understand that you cannot call yourself an appraiser and you cannot call this an appraisal unless you become a licensed appraiser. Now I'm repeating myself, I already said that. So that's kind of what this states here. And I just wanted to show you that I actually use this little disclaimer whenever I provide opinions of value, which will include a small letter. I'm not going to make you guys write a letter in your small assignment. I'm going to make you play around with Excel a little bit because I think it's a skill that not enough students have. And I just wanted to expose you to it at least once in this class. Again, we'll get into that in the supplemental video that'll explain what I'm expecting for the small assignment this week. But when I usually do this, I set all my data up in an Excel file, and then I write a letter explaining why things are the way they are, and this is what I think it's worth. And when I do that, I always make it clear, either at the top or the bottom, somewhere in the letter, that I'm not an appraiser. I'm a licensed realtor, so I have extensive knowledge of the neighborhoods in the area, and I can look up all these sales. but I'm not a licensed appraiser. You need to be very, very careful in regulated professions about how you refer to yourself and how you refer to items that you provide for clients and customers. Okay, so what you would do with this knowledge, if you're just going to stick to the business of being a licensed salesperson, is you would create what I would recommend referring to as opinions of value. Opinions of value. Opinions. Heck was that. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's talk about what this is. So in an opinion of value, you would provide a CMA. It's a comparative market analysis. A comparative market analysis, and I'm going to read this to you. It's a process in which real estate salespeople or investors, for the purpose of estimating the market value of a subject property. So that's the property for which the market value is required. You don't know quite yet what it's worth, but you know what some other ones like it might be worth. So you're going to investigate and examine in recent time, sales that have just occurred, the selling prices and characteristics for similar homes or properties in the same neighborhood as the subject property. This is a very important process in determining the listing price for your seller or the purchase price for buyers or investors. So that's what a CMA is, okay? And I will obviously ask you about that on the test. So how do we do this? All of the following are types of approaches that can be used in a comparative market analysis. The first being the one I almost always use, the second being one that I use once in a while, and the third approach being one that I might just make a reference to when I'm trying to negotiate or argue a price on a house, and you will learn why in a second here. So the first one is the one that in the comparative market analysis approach, that's the one that suits the CMA the most, because we're bringing in all these different comparables. And as we're bringing in the comparable sales, I call them comparables. A lot of realtors do that. It's not a real word, but it's a word that we've sort of, I forget what they call that, a poetic license maybe? Onomatopoeia? No, that's something else. I'm not going to test you on something like that, but comparables is a word that we use as short for comparable sales. And the comparative market analysis and the process that you're going through by looking at other stuff and comparing it and whatever, the comparable sales approach lends itself to a CMA the best. Even though with an income approach, I still look at comparable sales, even though the way I'm evaluating this is using the income of a house. I still look at other houses that sold and I check and see what they're getting for rent. I do that a lot, especially for my people that are buying student rentals. So I still use the income approach, and you can still present a CMA only having a few comparables or just using other rents as comparables. It doesn't have to be a proper CMA done with comparable sales approach. And then there's the cost approach, which again could be part of a CMA. And the cost approach is just based on how much it would cost to replace the house. So how much would it cost to replace the piece of land, and then how much to replace the house. And the reason that's not something I use very often is because these costs are always moving around. And there's a few reasons that we're going to talk about when we get to that slide, but it's just not a good way to establish value when you have stuff that's not all brand new. It's hard to compare an old property that was built a long time ago to something that might be built brand new right now. So I don't usually use that. I do use the income approach and the comparable sales approach in my CMA reports that I provide to clients. So let's talk about the three approaches. This one will involve the most homework and the most research, and is probably going to provide you with the most accurate market price for a house. It's common in commercial and residential, although in commercial you may often see the income approach used alongside of using comparable sales. That's what I was just talking about. But the comparable sales approach is pretty much all I use for residential. I'm not too worried about rental unless it's strictly going to be a rental property like student rentals and stuff like that. So usually it's always based on this. So you look at all these things that have sold and you establish benchmark pricing. Benchmark meaning that it's like a kind of the going rate type of pricing. Okay, it's in or around this neighborhood of pricing. You include historical sales data from recent times. So I don't ever like to, it's kind of hard in markets like Grand Bend where I work, which is a smaller rural area, because you don't have as much activity. But in a city market, I hardly ever go back past 6 months. I might have to go back a year. In Grand Bend, I usually do have to go back a year because there just isn't as much stuff available. So you're not going to want to go back too far. What somebody paid for a property even 2 years ago right now in London, Ontario, it doesn't really matter because the market's gone up so much just in the last 2 years. You can't really use that as a fair example. 6 months, yeah, that's pretty good. Okay, so that's why you don't want to use these old comparables. And sometimes there's very, very unique and specific types of properties that don't change hands that often, and you do have to go further back. And then you have to look at other properties that might not be, like, let's take lakefront, for example. If you had a lakefront property, my family used to have a property in a subdivision with lakefront properties, and we were on the lake, and there was a period of time in there where no lakefront property had sold for over 4 years because they just don't change hands that often. And I had listed a lakefront property going out of this period. So people were continuing to argue with my price, saying, well, look at what the last one sold for. This doesn't make sense. And I'd have to explain to them, well, when you don't have any like or exact comparables, I'm taking these comparables that are right behind it and right off the lake, which are going to sell for a lot less because they're not lakefront. But I'm taking the percentage of increase that they've had over the last 4 years and applying a similar percentage to the lakefronts, which, as it turned out, was exactly how they started to sell once they started to sell again. And I did get the money for these sellers that they wanted. So sometimes you have situations like that where it's just too far back. So I can show the comparable, the last one that sold 3 or 4 years ago, but then I have to show other properties right around it that are selling. Maybe they don't have that big value adding lakefront feature, but the percentage and increase they've experienced, that should apply to the same property in the same subdivision. It's just going to be a lot more expensive because it's on the lake. So I hope you understand that example, because it's, again, even when I wanted so badly to have another lakefront comparable sale to use for it, I knew it wasn't the right comparable to use. It just makes my job easier. I needed to use more recent sales because that shows what the overall market is doing. And the overall market economics, they move properties together. They move prices on similar properties together. And that's why I mentioned we're going to talk about economics in here too. So even if you haven't had a sale of something just like it for a very long time, you can still use comparables that are close to it, okay? And here's the things we compare on. So obviously, the data that we're going to pull, the first thing is going to be price. That's one of the things we're going to look at. And we're going to see prices that aren't exactly the same for houses that might look the same on the surface. And then I usually look to the time on market too. That's not really a factor used necessarily in the actually established price we're going to use, but well, maybe it is. Actually, I shouldn't say that, because I have looked at time on market and looked at houses that maybe started at the same price my seller is going to want, and the prices haven't gone up, and I say, look, they started where you want to start, and look how long it sat there. It's very dangerous to overprice listings, okay? And that's one of the reasons you want to spend a lot of time on the CMA. And this is one of the things I say to my clients all the time, and it'll be on one of these next slides. Very, very often in real estate, I see clients get less money in the end by overpricing the listing than they would have got if they just priced it within the market from the get-go. I'll repeat that. I see them get less money in the end by pricing the listing too high, because eventually, after it sits there for a while, people are like, oh no, that thing's been there forever, I'm just going to start lowballing it, and then they don't get what they want, and then they get frustrated, and then they get to the point where they have to sell it because they've already reached the closing date for the house they're buying, and they have no choice, something like that. So you need to spend time looking at this, and that's why time on market does make a difference. Bedrooms and bathroom counts, of course, the size of the house, the size of the property, all right, the age of the house. Does it have a garage, and how many garage bays does it have? Well, this is just a single, this is a double, and we have kind of calculations that we add. Like if it's got a 2-car garage, we figure that's about 20 grand. I usually add 10 grand a bay. I don't know if all realtors do the same thing, but I've talked to builders a lot, and that's kind of what they say is the going rate. And then there's location factors. Well, wait a minute. If we're looking up stuff in the same neighborhood, how could there be different location factors? Well, because this one looks exactly the same. The house might look exactly the same, but then you read the listing and you're like, oh, that backyard backs onto green space. So there's a lot more privacy. So they probably got that extra 25 grand. And then you have to tell your seller, listen, I know you want to get the same thing as them, but you don't back onto green space, and you're on a corner, which for residential is not as good. So that's my next bullet there, corner versus not corner. If you're commercial, especially if you're row commercial. So if you take a city like London, Ontario, and you look at Richmond Row, if you don't have a corner lot, you might not have any parking at all, okay? And you might have no access to the back of the building, stuff like that. Especially in smaller towns, it's even worse. So in Grand Bend, where I'm at, if you're on Main Street and you don't have a corner lot, no parking. You just don't have any parking. Only the corner lots for commercial have parking. So for commercial, a corner lot is actually a more valuable thing. If you're residential, why would you not want to be on a corner? First of all, instead of another yard next to you on the side of your house, you have a street, which most would argue is a lot less aesthetically pleasing than someone else's backyard with more trees and more green space. And secondly, it's busier. Okay, so you might have more street noise, more traffic, it might be more dangerous for your kids. It's just busier. I've seen situations with residential where the corner lot actually ends up making it kind of a good thing because the back corner backs onto something else that's private, but most of the time you don't want a corner lot. In the town where I'm from, just being near the beach is a factor. It doesn't, obviously being on the beach or being lakefront would be a huge factor, but being near the beach. Distance from a major highway is a huge deal where I'm from because the major highway has a lot of trucks driving down it. And if you get down into a subdivision, you'll never have a truck driving by your house unless somebody's working on their house. It'll never be a semi-truck. So that creates a lot of noise as well. And little things like that. How deep are you into the subdivision from the major road? The deeper you get, usually the more expensive the land is. And that affects, so you can see the same exact house sell for a different amount of money because of these location factors. Having super sketchy neighbors that have crap all over their lawn, yep, you better believe that's going to affect your value, okay? And then school zones. This is typically a value adding factor. There are older buyers that want to stay away from that stuff, but for the most part, the target market looking for homes in neighborhoods that are close to schools already, they would want to be as closer the better, right? And then if you happen to back onto the playground or something, that's pretty private because there's only going to be students out there during the school day, and most of them aren't all the way at the back of the playground. Most of them hang around by the buildings. So that's a good thing too. So these are all factors that you can add into a comparative market analysis. When I show you my examples in the next video, you'll actually see I have in my Excel file these weird columns that are not quantitative data, but just oddball things that might be specific to that neighborhood. And is it like this or isn't it? And does it add value? Okay. So lots of things to consider. And I'm going to have you kind of come up with a list. It can totally be based on mine from the notes. And just run a market analysis comparing a few houses. You're going to have to use listed houses because you don't have access to all the sold houses without a real estate license. And then you're going to put some stuff into an Excel file. I'll stop talking about that because you're going to have to go to the second video to know how to do that. So, okay, this approach can be used for all the different types and categories of real estate. Although I do see the income approach coming in a lot more often with income properties and then sort of combined with a comparable sales approach. But you can definitely use this with all the types of real estate. Establishing price multiples is what we were just talking about on the previous page. So a factor or feature that can be used to establish a property's value. Value added from a feature. So one of its features. I don't know why that took a minute to get the text refreshing into the screen. That was weird. It's not keeping up with my video. So how many bedrooms it has, that could be price multiples. Sort of taking the area of the lot and dividing it by the price itself could be a price multiple. Dividing the bedrooms by the price itself. Dividing the bathrooms by the price itself. So it's a bit of a math problem, but it's taking those things we talked about on the previous page. And I'm going to give you more examples here. Because it's not just, this is kind of part of them. But yeah, value per square foot, average price per similar room counts and features, rent rolls per room. So if you're doing an income property or it's commercial, like rent per room type of thing, and then how does that factor into the price? Rent per unit, number of apartments per sale of a building. So if somebody's buying an apartment building in an area, whether or not they're all vacant or occupied, just irrelevant of that, so completely irrespective of that, how much would the building be worth per apartment if they were in decent shape? Because that building is all rented out, and I'm trying to get an idea here, right? So number of apartments per sale price of building. So you go to the other building and you see what it's sold for, and then you go to this one and say, well, it should be worth about this much. So these are examples of price multiples. Cost per square meter. I use that a lot because I do a lot of vacant land in Grand Bend with no building on it. So I do cost per square meter. If it's, where is it? There. If it's on the lake or on the water, I do cost per front foot. Because really, whatever the shape of the lot is behind it is not as big of a deal as how much privacy and front feet you have on the water. And you'll see that in my CMA example too in the next video. It's very interesting, the massive amount of money that people are getting for every foot they have fronting the beach in Grand Bend. And then just going back up to this one, cost per door for new condo sales. So this is another one that's kind of more the example I was talking about here, but condos are individually sold. Okay, an apartment building, a landlord buys and maintains all the apartments and just collects rent. A condo building, all the individual owners own their condos. Okay, and these are definitions we haven't spent a ton of time on in this class, nor will we, because it's all stuff that'll be covered in the real estate course. But condominium ownership is just like owning a house. You still own a unit. You still own a home. Okay, it's just that you're owning part of a collection of homes instead of the entire thing. It's not a timeshare. That's not the same thing. Cost per square, square, SW. And that's the last one there. I just fixed that typo. Cost per square meter for tear down versus one you could renovate. Okay, so this is, again, an example that I've found when you get into a really hot area and there's a lot of new houses going up where the old houses used to be, you often see the value of the old houses basically depreciate down to almost nothing because it's out of place in the neighborhood now. And what you're buying, if it could be renovated, even though renovation is very expensive, maybe it would still be worth more than the tear down because it costs money to tear the house down. So things like that, and you can cost per square meter out lots that have been sold in one scenario or the other in neighborhoods that are going that way. So the biggest thing you need to understand here is comparable sales approach is just about gathering in as many different variables and features and factors you can about other properties that are close by and similar to the one you're trying to sell. Close by and similar. And when you're gathering these things in, it should be about timing. So they have to be for recency. So there's geography, similar house, and recency. These are three huge factors that I'll probably ask you about on the test, which is why they're at the bottom of this slide that you have to remember. Okay, and these bullets kind of speak for themselves. It makes it a lot easier to go through this process if you can find listings that have good photographs, virtual tours, along with very good detailed descriptions, because then you get to see all of the reasons this property may have sold for more or less than the one you are looking to list. Okay, that kind of information is huge, and that's why the best place to go to start your CMAs is logging into your local real estate board's login, like the back end that you'll have access to as a licensed realtor, where you get to see the sold listings. Okay, because once they sell, they disappear from realtor.ca. We've talked about that. Okay. So quality of finishing, quality of fixtures, these are things you can see in those photographs that you might not be able to see just by looking at the sale in the registry system. You want more information. Landscaping, oh my goodness, landscaping can get expensive. So landscaping features can add a lot to a property. Does a pool add a lot to a property? That's hit and miss. And again, I wouldn't ask you that question because there really isn't a right answer. It totally depends on the buyer. Generally, they say pools make properties harder to sell. But everyone I've had with a pool, I always end up finding this family that wants a pool, and then they're happy to pay the price. So I don't really agree with that in my experience. Upgrades that are just done, very, very hard to tell unless you have the full listing description that talks about the furnace, that when it was replaced, the air conditioning. HVAC, by the way, that's something that's going to come up a lot in real estate. And you need to know that's an acronym for heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. Okay, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. I just put air condition, whatever. So that'll probably be on the test. Little stuff like that. Hidden things that are hard to see in the photos but might be in a good description. Central vac, a carburetor, triple pane windows, wired for sound. All the smart home stuff you're seeing now, stuff like that. If you have a really hard time finding comparables, we've talked about how you might have to get stuff that's sort of in the same subdivision but not lakefront or something like that. If there's just nothing, then you may have to use listed properties as comparables. And again, as soon as you do that, you want to take the first thing you want to look at is how long it's been listed. because if it's been listed a long time, which you guys won't be able to really see at realtor.ca, you can get that from some other like sort of second market sites in Canada. We don't have as many of those as the States. We've talked about that, like Zillow. But most of them don't have that data. So that's more of a realtor thing. And you don't always have to include that anyway. But if you can't find comparables, you might need to include listed properties. I just wanted to add that in there. Once you have it all compiled, you put it all together in a nice spreadsheet, and then you write a little note with it, and you should have a ballpark valuation on a subject property. Cool, done. I'm done. I just spent a couple hours at my computer, and now I look like the best realtor ever. Not yet. Don't ever give someone a valuation until you've gone to the property in person to make sure, number one, that you haven't missed some amazing thing they did, and then you're going to come back with this number and they're going to be all super insulted that it's not high enough. Or number two, which could be a lot worse for you, that you give them some number that you figured the property would be worth, and then you get there and the house is in horrible condition and the basement's full of mold and there's all these things you didn't know about, and that's going to affect the price when you compare it to properties that didn't have those issues. So get all your research done before you go meet a client for a sales presentation if you're going to try and get their listing, but don't give them that number until you've seen their house and you've seen the situation there. Okay, every property is different. That's a huge rule that I've made for myself after making that mistake now more than once. Oh, I could get at least that much for your property, and then I show up and the place didn't even have a basement, and I didn't look back at the previous listings and assumed there was a basement there to finish, and there wasn't. That really changes the value of a property. And then they were all bent with me because I told them I could get so much and I was going back on it. They're like, oh, see, you're just trying to get the listing. You just said that so I would meet with you, which was not the case. I never do that, okay? Because I don't want to be in a position where I've had a property listed for 3, 6, 8 months and it hasn't sold. I hate that. That's another reason this work is so important, because you don't want to make extra work for yourself, okay? And that leads to this bullet, okay? It doesn't just make it really hard, all right, that they overprice stuff and you're okay with them overpricing stuff. If there are literally no comparables that justify a price, but there are comparables for a house you're trying to list that look just like that house and would show that seller that this is what they're probably going to get, why would the economics of that market just decide to change their mind? It would change its mind. I'm personifying economics just for their house. It doesn't make any sense. Why is it going to be different just for them? Well, we worked really hard on our house. Everybody's like that with their own house, okay? They all want the most money they can get, and that's what the point of the CMA is, to try and find out what that number is. But if you allow them to overprice it, they need to be aware of this. I wouldn't allow it, but on top of them probably getting less in the end for the reasons I've also already discussed. You overprice it, sits on the market forever. That in itself creates the lowballing. It creates the people coming in and wanting to give you less. So if you think you're going to market just to see if anybody reacts to the price and you actually don't need to sell it, you don't plan on selling it for 5 years, I hate those kind of listings. I don't take those listings. But there are people that are testing the water, so to speak, with crazy prices. Then I guess it doesn't matter. But most people only list their house because they need to sell it, or they want to sell it so they can upgrade. And if you want the thing gone, listen to your realtor. Okay? And for you guys, as the salespeople, if you become a licensed realtor and one of your biggest jobs with listing is going to be at the very, very beginning to price the listing, okay? You do not want to make all that extra work for yourself, all right? And that's what that's going to do. But the biggest thing is you're going to look bad because they're going to end up getting less money in the end if they overprice it. Every time. It happens every time. And here are those 3 big things I was talking about. I didn't say geography. I said proximity. Proximity, recent time, similar property. So what does this all come down to? What kind of comparables are you going to use? Ones that are close, ones that have sold recently, and ones that are similar. Don't just randomly find stuff that's really cheap because you want your job to be easier and you want to show them cheap stuff. You could get in a lot of trouble for that, actually, if you give them a CMA where it was clear that you were misleading them. Or don't randomly find stuff that's more expensive just so they think you're going to... This pricing thing is huge, and that's more what this week should be about, is about pricing, okay? I don't have that in there because I don't want to make it seem like I'm trying to teach you guys how to price properties. I'm trying to teach you how to research prices on properties, and then you're going to know what price to put on it, okay? That's why I don't have a week called pricing, all right? It's all about research. So if you decide you want to put some huge price on it just in an effort to get the listing and then slowly beat them up over the next few months, that doesn't make you look good, nor does it lead to more business. That's the biggest problem. You start doing stuff like that and maybe making people think you're going to get more just to get the listing. As soon as they realize you're not going to get it and the thing sits there forever, you're not going to get more listings. You get more listings because you sell stuff. You don't get more listings because of how many listings you have. You get more listings because you sell stuff. There, okay, and then this is something I'm going to explain right before we get into the income approach, because there's two different things going on here, and there's two different, basically, collections of data that you can include in the CMA. 90% of this is going to be comparable sales type of stuff, which is a relative valuation approach, which we'll talk about in a minute. It's more time consuming. It's probably more accurate in the end. But why do we do all this? So I do have some slides about price here, okay? And this is all the stuff I've been talking about. So I've sort of already said all these things. It saves you time and trouble, okay? A lot, okay? I'm just going to end it there, because every listing that I've overpriced, that I've allowed to be overpriced, guaranteed they have sucked up more time than anything else. I'm not saying that your listing's gone in a day because you priced it right. That's not usually the case. It's never that easy in a small rural area either where I work, but your listing will never sell if it's overpriced, okay? It also makes you look smart, skilled, capable, professional, and all those things, okay? You come in and you show them that you know everybody's house and what they sold for. They're still impressed, even though that's your job, because lots of other realtors, they don't do that. They just walk into the room and say, hey, nice to meet you. Here's the number you need to put on that. I know because I'm the guy. I'm the person in this town that does all the business, so I know. You put a nice stack of research on their kitchen table when you go there to present the listing. You did some work, and you know your stuff, and this is where the price should be. Here's a good one, and this is what I always tell my people, that every time I see the sellers that habitually overprice listings and they never sell and they get in trouble and then they do the same thing the next time. You can't make up your own economy, okay? There you go. It's that simple. Economics rule, okay? Economics are king. Economics have a massive effect on house prices, the economy, and you just can't make up your own economy. Even the richest person in the world that wants your property is still going to want to know what the neighbor paid next door. They are, okay? Because numbers don't lie. How about that for a good one? And they don't. So it's kind of the same thing as the one before, but I just like that saying. And because you have to do your job. How about that? Okay? Because this is part of your job, is to make sure that when you go in to tell somebody how much you think something should be, that it's an educated answer, that you've done your research. Okay, let's get to these other two approaches, which you're going to spend less time on because they are used a lot less. This one is actually quite simple. You just take the money a property makes, put it against the cost of the property, and you get a percentage return rate. That's the income approach. So the reason I didn't just put rent is because there are lots of properties, especially like malls. Malls get rent. They also get a percentage of sales. A lot of malls do. Okay, so there's stuff like that too. You're actually getting business income as well as rental income. But this is the approach I used with a lot of my investors that were buying student rentals around Fanshawe when I started, and it pulled them right off the Western market because they're like, I got to buy this one by Western because those seem to be worth more, which probably means they'll be worth more in future years. I said, what's more important to you? Making money every year, or the amount of money you'll make when you sell it 25 years from now, in which case both are probably going to be worth more. They said making money every year. And then I said, well, great. Here's a house around Western with 5 bedrooms. They're getting $500 a bedroom. It's $400,000. Here's one by Fanshawe with 5 bedrooms. They're getting $500 a bedroom. And it's $220,000. Which one do you think you should buy? It's simple math. Okay, so that's the income approach. And with the income approach, I still use comparable sales, which are other rental houses getting the same rent. And it's usually not based on the sale, the house, the money the house sold for. It's based on the rent they're getting to show them that the rent is consistent. So it's simpler and much more refined because it's just basic math. A lot less variables involved, usually just rent and income and then what you pay. So variables, rent and income against the price. Most investors use direct capitalization, which is a great model. As long as the income keeps coming in, the market price for the property does not shoot down. So the thing you have to remember about investors that are buying property to make money on them, to rent and make money on them, they have a collection of properties. They're renting them out long term. They're renting them out yearly. Now there's people buying properties literally just to rent them out via Airbnb, which is great. How long are they going to own them? If they think they're going to buy this in the GTA area now and then turn around and sell it in 2 years for like 75 to 100% more than they paid, that does not happen every 2 years in most real estate markets. Okay, so the length of time you're going to own it can be a factor, but overall, while real estate markets do go up and down on a chart, and I'll show you some of those here, it generally is an uptrend where stocks can go right into a downtrend like in a day, like it's crazy. So as long as the income keeps coming in and you don't need to sell the property tomorrow, which means if the price goes down, like that's the thing, the price isn't probably going to go down if you're planning on investing in these houses for 20 years and it's going to be part of your retirement plan. And if you go to sell them 20 years later and they're not that much more than you paid for them, maybe they're even a tiny bit less, guess what? You still made money on those properties because you bought properties with a good cap rate that you calculated using the income approach. So it's like this: purchase price divided by your annual net income. Make sure you understand the difference between net and gross. Net means that you've taken out all the costs. You know, you paid your mortgage. You paid, well, a lot of people don't consider the mortgage a cost. I do. I want to see a nice cap rate. So you take out your mortgage. The reason people don't is because the purchase price wasn't really the purchase price they paid when they bought it then. It's like the mortgage price every year. That's why people usually leave their mortgage out of that. So let's say you do it that way. You'd leave your mortgage in because that was part of your purchase price, but you'd take out all the utility costs, if you had to pay any, all the upkeep, anything like that, your landlord license, all those fees, your property taxes, all that stuff, and then you divide that into the purchase price you paid, and you get like 6%. Oh, that's not high enough. I want at least 8. Oh, you get 14% or 20%. That's insanely good if you get 20%. Most investors want to see at least 8%. Okay? Make sure you understand the difference between net and gross. Gross is just the amount of money you collect in rent with nothing deducted from it, no expenses at all. So, and it's net and gross the same in accounting. You guys probably have a pretty decent idea of what that is. So, there is another approach. This is more used with commercial properties because commercial properties are typically owned by corporations that can amortize or discount their assets for tax purposes. They keep depreciating them. Depreciation meaning it's worth less and less each year. So you can discount the cash to, that's not necessarily the reason to do it, but that's one of them. But you discount what you bring in every year to mitigate the risk. Say, okay, I bring this much in, but I know I'm going to have surprises. So I'm going to cut 5% off the top. And then do I still make money? So it's the same type of model with a little more math involved. And there's an example here. I'm not going to test you on this math stuff. There's no math on the test. No calculators, but you should have an understanding of what this is. I might ask you a question of what would be another approach used in the income approach where people do this, and you know it was the discounted cash approach, okay? This is an absolute valuation method. So comparable sales, relative. Income approach, and the next one we're going to talk about, the cost approach, absolute. Okay, so the difference between the two is this. Okay, relative means it's characteristics and value of other things that are kind of like the one you're kind of looking to sell to establish value. Okay, absolute means the value of the property comes only from the characteristics of that property. So that's where the income calculation is done. You're not, now I do add in some relative factors when I'm doing the income approach by looking at rent on other properties and stuff, but the biggest thing and the most important number is the cap rate, and cap rate is an absolute valuation model. Okay, so it's good to understand the difference between the two because there are realtors that talk in these terms very often, and you will run into clients that are good at math that understand this stuff because they're investment bankers. It's the same exact kind of language and terminology. The mentality, as I was just saying, is very similar to stock market valuation, but the cycles are much more drawn out in real estate. And that's how we're going to wrap up this presentation. More examples here, but before we do that, I'm going to talk about the cost approach, which is the simplest out of all the three that I never really use with clients. I only use it as a claim when I'm kind of negotiating. So, and it's quite simple and obvious. It's another absolute valuation method, and it involves valuing a property at their replacement cost. So meaning, what's the land cost? What would it cost to build a building just like this on the same piece of land? Okay. Problems, maintenance and upkeep on older buildings is a lot different. Although you might be getting the older building for less than you'd have to pay because construction costs are a lot higher now, and you have to consider these things, and those are all relative costs and not taken into account in this model. Depreciation versus the lower value of the older building. So if it's been depreciated to nothing and it's a mess, then it probably is better off just to tear it down, and you'd want to use the cost approach. But if it's only like 10 years old, you might be able to keep depreciating it, and then it's not worth it to build a new building. So there's all these weird factors that come into play that aren't taken into account in the cost approach. Volatile construction costs, for sure. Like when they had the forest fire, lumber went up like by 50%. It's crazy. Labor supplies up and down. Guys are cheaper, guys are more expensive, all that kind of stuff. Okay, so it's not a great approach. However, I love this when I'm selling stuff in the Grand Bend area, because a lot of people are buying those to rent them, and they don't care that much about the condition. So when I know there's a deal that I've listed, and I say, listen, why don't you ask your client to go get a quote or what they think it would cost to build a new 5-bedroom house that you could rent for this much per week? And there's no way they could buy the lot and then build the house for the price I'm selling this for. It's a good deal. So I often use it as an argument in negotiations, but I don't generally ever use this approach when I'm meeting clients to do a listing presentation or something. So let's talk about the economics of all this. This is the fun part of the presentation. We only got a few minutes left. I'm just going to show you some charts, and you're going to be just astonished at what people have gone through in the stock market versus real estate. And this is why, at the very beginning of the course, I started the course by saying real estate is one of the most, it is the number one source of wealth in the entire world, because, well, lots of people like Warren Buffett have made lots of money on stocks. Real estate is more stable, and real estate has proven itself to be more prosperous. So let's talk about situations where it would be, and this shouldn't have been Michigan. This should have said Michigan, Florida, and the West Coast. I'll even fix that really quick. Okay, there. So I've jumped out here because I want to be able to kind of zoom. Well, no, I'll go back to slideshow. It's fine. Let's go back to full slideshow. So situations like this can make real estate look a little more like the stock market, okay? Fleming Drive, when we had the riots around Fanshawe College. Just a massive catastrophe for people that were trying to sell their houses at that time. They waited a few years, things were okay. But a lot of people, especially millennials that actually have found the money to invest in real estate, they think that you can just buy a house, sell it for a year later, and automatically make 20 grand, automatically make 30 grand without doing anything to the house. They think that's normal. Okay, that is not normal. And what's also abnormal is when markets take a dive like these markets have, like Toronto in 2017. Everybody was freaking out, like, oh my gosh, look how much it's just taking a crap, right? Like, look how bad this is. And same with Michigan and Florida and the west coast of the U.S. We'd never seen anything like that. Like just massive drops in real estate, like really, really fast for real estate purposes at least. And in the charts I'm going to show you that it wasn't actually as fast as people think, and it did recover in a short amount of time as well. So, but when I say short amount of time, I am talking years, where stocks do this in days. Okay, it's just crazy. So the cool thing about real estate, even though you do see super volatile situations like that, like these are examples of dangerous and volatile situations that you could have never saw coming. As long as you're willing to own the house for a little longer, you should be fine. So you won't lose your shirt overnight. But for people here, I had a client that I had 4 listings there. I had 3 on Fleming and 1 on Prosperity, and he needed those houses gone so he could get a mortgage in the States because they knew about that debt, and he couldn't. And he had to sell going into that market. Had he waited just a year, he would have got way more money. He had to sell literally in the middle of the riots. His houses were listed. I had a deal on some. I mean, it's just crazy. So stuff like that can happen, but it's not likely, okay? Overall economics do drive real estate, where stocks can go up on a tweet. Stocks can go down in tweets. Specific stocks can go up and down based on somebody's sentiment in social media. It's just ridiculous. And they can go up and down by 5 to 10, 15, 25, 30% in a day. Real estate doesn't generally do that, okay? So, and that's why there's so much wealth there, because it is more stable. So people can move things around and shift things around if they get in trouble. Whereas people who lose their shirt in the stock market, they're screwed. It's done, okay? I said I'd have some investment stats. Here you go. Now, I'm going to let you spend a little more time on this. You can pause the video now and spend some time on this. And what you will find is not what you think. You're going to think, oh man, like prices have gone down so much. Look at that. Look at those drops in 2018 from 2017. And look, it really wasn't up that much in 2017, even though everybody thought it was. Overall, things are way up. And look, as soon as it went down in 2008 with the U.S. market, it went back up again. Almost as much. And then it had to come down back a little bit and then up again. If you add this up, and that's just that one quarter, if you add this up across the table, you're going to find that generally speaking, we're just going up. Even though we have these huge dips, it happens, right? But we are. So here's what I want to say about investment stats. If you want to be a real estate investor, plan on owning the property for a while. If you want to buy something and sell it next year and you think you're going to make a ton of money, because those are the only stories you hear. You don't hear about the guys that ended up having like 25 properties by the time they were 50 and they're pretty much real estate rich. You hear about the guy that bought something in Toronto and sold the condo the year after, and it was even crappier than when they bought it, and their pets peed all over the place and they got $150,000 more than they paid for it. That is not normal. And then the next year in 2018, everybody thought the market fell off a cliff because Toronto fell back a little bit, and that was totally to be expected. That is what economics says is probably going to happen. That is what, statistically speaking, happens on charts when you look at stocks. It's the same thing. So let's take a look. Check it out, okay? Here was that big spike coming out of 2016, okay? Here was that drop. Oh my God! Oh Lord, Mike! Oh, you wouldn't believe my friends in Toronto. They're devastated, financially destroyed. Really? So they paid up here, and now it's the same price as it was at the beginning of 2016. Who cares? It'll be fine. And then it went up a bit, and they're like, oh my God, it's okay. And then it started going down a bit. They're like, oh no. Look at 2019's back up again. Yet all you hear on the news is how, Vancouver and Toronto, the markets are falling apart. That's just what the media does, okay? It went for a huge spike. When things go for a huge spike, they come back a bit before they start going up. Look, it's up now. But I bet you everybody thinks Toronto's down right now. And it's not. Okay, so here's Treb over, let's go all the way back to 95, okay? See what I mean about stability? See, look at that. That is stable. Oh, there's a big spike. Oh my God, we caved in. We crashed. We're devastated. Canada's banking policies and the general financial climate in Canada will not allow stuff like we saw in the U.S. But even in the U.S., take a look, okay? So this is coming out of 2012. Now, I don't have the next charts, but I'm telling you that, look, it didn't go down that much. Where they were on the West Coast here, so 6 or 7 years ago, they were there too. So what? So it went back. It didn't go back to 20 years ago. How bad is this really, right? And this is what Michigan and Florida got stuck in too, worse than certain areas. But since then, it's just started to come back up. And now I know for a fact that a lot of prices in Michigan, and it probably would have been, are right back to where they were. Right back to where they were. Yet everyone was freaking out. I'll be stuck in this house for the rest of my life. They were walking away from mortgages. And that just, it's not necessary, okay? This kind of volatility is spread out over months and years and decades. Okay, and then we look at something like this. This is a stock that I want to say, well, no, I have made money on this stock. I've lost more money on others. This is Aurora Cannabis for the last 24 months. Holy crap, we're at over $12 US. Oh, no, now we're back to less than half of that in, I don't know, weeks, days. Look at this. Oh, we're back there. We're going to be fine now. We're totally fine now. I think that was a peak it reached. Oh my God, we're losing. Oh my God, we're back there. And now, everybody, once people get used to that, they think, oh, I'll just buy it down here and everything will be fine. Look where it is now. And this is all in the time span of 24 months. Massive swings. So even though we use a lot of the same techniques and methods and terminology when we're valuating real estate that they use in the stock market, I did want to spend some time showing you that the actual fluctuations and the volatility in real estate versus stocks, it is not the same, okay? Not even close. And this chart right here says it all, okay? Look at the '08 drop. When you go all the way back to 95 and include the current year, You barely even notice it happened. Look at that. But this chart that I'm showing here on the US, it only went to 2012, so you don't get to see the rest of it, and it was a little bigger. The volatility and the shift and the change, they were larger in the States. And that has a lot to do with our banking policies in Canada that we have in place to try and prevent stuff like that happening. We don't have the kind of population density in Canada that they do in the States to recover from stuff like this. So, and having said that, nor do we have the kind of population density to have something like this happen with just mass hysteria and everybody just dumping their houses. If they would have just stayed, they probably would be fine now. Like it's so there's a lot to consider here in terms of economics, and having this knowledge means that you'll go into a listing presentation more equipped than any other realtor. I mean that. And here we go, on to the next video. I will see you there.